Members, it's the appointed time and we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee. Today's meeting is scheduled to end at 4:30 p.m. If necessary, I may extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Before the meeting, I'd like to remind members that if you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in relation to the discussion item today, please, in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure, disclose the nature of such interests before you speak on the item. Please also bear in mind Rule 84 of the Rules of Procedure regarding voting with direct pecuniary interests. Item 1, FCR 2025-2651. Members are invited to approve a 2.2% increase in the standard payment rates under the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance Scheme and the rates of allowances under the Social Security Allowance Scheme, with retrospective effect from the 1st of February 2026, and note the estimated financial implication of $1,660 million each year arising from Item A. The panel on welfare services at the policy briefing on the 26th of January this year already took note of the proposal, and the Labour and Welfare Bureau by circulation has submitted the information papers to the panel on welfare services. I'd like to remind members that please raise questions that are directly related to this discussion item. For items concerning other areas, please raise them outside the FC meeting. I have already talked about this with the Deputy Chair. We will strictly abide by this principle. Please do not digress from the discussion item. Now, members who would like to speak, please press the request to speak button. I remind members that after the Q&A session, I will immediately put this item to vote. Please pay attention to the progress of this discussion item and return to the meeting room to vote. Attending this item, we have Mr. Ho Kai-ming, Acting Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Ms. Nancy Kwan, Deputy Director of Social Welfare, Ms. Ivy Chen, Principal Assistant Secretary for Labour and Welfare, and Mr. Jimmy Lin, Senior Statistician. Now I will invite Chairman of the Panel on Welfare Services to tell us about the paper that was circulated to members of the panel. Chairman, the government adjusts the standard payment rates under the CSSA scheme and the rates of allowance under the Social Security Allowance Scheme annually based on the rate of change of the Social Security Assistance of prices. In accordance with the established adjustment mechanism and the usual practice, the administration proposes to increase the above two Social Security payment rates with retrospective effect from the 1st of February this year. The panel on welfare services took note of the proposal at the policy briefing on the 26th of January this year. Upon the administration's request, the panel circulated the proposal to members. The panel has no comments on the relevant financial proposal. Thank you. Now 9 members have pressed the request to speak button. I will give each member 4 minutes, including questions and answers. Mr. Lam Chun-sing, please. Thank you, Chairman. The standard payment rates under the CSSA scheme are adjusted annually, so this is not too controversial. However, I have the following suggestions for the administration. Regarding the adjustment of the rent allowance, it's going to go up by 1.3%. According to the paper, this is adjusted based on the rent index. However, I'm worried that the rent index covers a rather broad scope. I'm worried that the increase of rent for subdivided units is higher than that of private housing units. So does the increase truly reflect the housing needs of the grassroots? According to some survey, those who get the rental allowance, 55% of them found that the rental allowance they get is not enough for them to rent an apartment from a private housing estate or even a subdivided unit. The government previously said the rental for basic housing unit or subdivided unit may go down, but I believe even if it goes down, we'll have to wait until people have moved to the transitional housing units or have moved to the public housing units. The basic housing units will be registered starting from this March. Some landlords may stop renting out their apartments to the tenants, and those from the grassroots who are living in subdivided units will have to move elsewhere, and they might be forced to rent a much more expensive apartment. They may have to pay 1,000 to 2,000 more. So for the rent index, will you take into account the rate of change of the rental level of the market instead of just looking at the rent index? Well, this is a policy matter because your question concerns how the administration decide on the rate of change for the rent allowance. Under Secretary, in 2020, when we reviewed the CSSA rate, we increased the MRA, maximum rent allowance, by 27%. The rental market has been quite active. However, at the same time, the government is building a lot more public housing units, and we are offering transitional housing to people as an additional option. We understand that the rent for these kind of transitional housing units or subdivided units is a lot cheaper. So for those who are living in SDU or those who are getting CSSAs, they may consider other housing options. For CSSA recipients, they either are jobless or they do not meet the minimum income level. So we consider that they may think about moving to transitional housing to improve their living environment. Now I will defer to Mr. Jimmy Lin to elaborate. Mr. Lin, I thank the member for the questions. We draw reference from the CPIA rent index for private housing when we decide on the rent allowance level. And under the rent index, SDU's rental level is covered. Mr. Scotland. Thank you, Chairman. I share the same question with that of Mr. Lam Chun Sing. I am concerned about the rate of change of the rent index. According to the existing mechanism, the administration looks at the CPIA rent index to decide on the rent allowance. The rent allowance will be increased by 1.3%, but even with the increase, it will not be able to reflect the rental increase for those who live in subdivided units. The administration encourages those living in SDUs to move to transitional housing units. So my question is, apart from the increase of 1.3% for the rent allowance, when adjusting the rent allowance, will the government put in place a new mechanism to allow greater flexibility? Will you take into consideration the increase of rental level for those living in subdivided units according to surveys? The grassroots are facing a 5 to 15% increase of rent for SDUs. So will you be more lenient in order to help those from the grassroots and are living in SDUs? Again, this is a policy matter. I hope the members who are waiting to speak will focus on the paper provided by the administration. Undersecretary, if you look at the figures, as mentioned, we increased the rent allowance by 27% in 2020. As for the general rental level, we took into account the RVD index. We see that the CPIA rent index increased by 2.3%, and we are proposing an increase of 1.3%. As for 2020, the RVD index dropped by 7.2%, but still we proposed an increase of the rent allowance. So we will make adjustments based on the market situation. But please note that in 2020, we made a substantial increase by 1/4. So in future, we will continue to take into account different considerations. Next, Mr. Chao Shu-chung. I support the 2.2% increase in the standard payment rates under the CSSA scheme. The SSAIP is done based on the household expenditure survey. And the household expenditure survey, the latest one has already been completed. Do you have the relevant information, including the participation rate, that you can share with us? Also, starting from October 2025, the SWD rolled out the unpaid work program, which replaced the previous employment program. In the previous version of the employment program, the government encouraged those to get a job. Mr. Chao Shu-chung, this has nothing to do with the administration paper. Well, I will get to that question. Back then, a yearly budget of $160 million were set aside, but now the provision is about $90 million. Well, your question is concerning that particular employment program. Yes, Undersecretary. I will defer to the SWD. I thank the member for the questions. From October 2024 to September 2025, we conducted a household expenditure survey that studies the expenditure pattern of CSSA recipients. We conducted this survey to update our weighting system, which reflects the SSA recipients' expenditure. Last September, we completed the survey and we interviewed 1,700 households of CSSA recipients. We are compiling the relevant statistics. We believe that by the end of this year, we will announce the results and we will update the weighting system accordingly. Mr. Bill Tang.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this item has not been discussed in panel, so I hope that the Chairman will be more lenient. While we respect the system, we're not going to object to it. We have to be allowed to ask questions because this was never discussed in the Welfare Services panel. I do have some financial questions. The MRA will be increased by 1.3%. And some members just now said that the increase is not realistic enough. Let me take a 400 square foot flat in Kowloon. Its rent between 2024 and 2025, the increase is 4.7%. As we all know, 70% of the SDUs are in Kowloon. So the rent index does not reflect the reality. I'd like to know more about that. Second, it is said in the paper that old age allowance and old age living allowance amount to $7.7 billion and $44.5 billion. That's quite substantial. It seems that the Social Services Department is not vetting this kind of recipient as stringently as a CSSA household. Sometimes when the elderly persons passed away, no one notifies the social welfare department and the subsidy continues to be dispersed. I wonder if there will be a automatic system that allow the social welfare department to be notified as soon as the recipient of the allowance passed away. What is the vetting procedures of the old age allowance, old age living allowance, and disability allowance? Secretary. Thank you. We don't just focus on a particular district when we calculate the rent index. Some non-CSSA recipients live in subdivided units. Some CSSA's households are living in transitional housing. We encourage people to move away from substandard housing and move into the government's subvented housing or transitional housing. So we don't make adjustment in just according to the fluctuations of rents in a certain district. People, if they have difficulty paying their rent, we encourage them to move to some transitional housing. We have some in the new territories. I will ask my colleague to talk about the money aspect of the allowance. Thank you. The member talked about elderly singleton who are recipient of old age allowance and old age living allowance. We do have a regular mechanism to vet the status of the recipient, and we do cross-check our information with the immigration department. We will be notified if there is any changes to the recipient of the allowance. We conduct random sample check and regular inspection, or regular check. Next, Mr. Robert Lee. Thank you. We are here to discuss the raise of standard payment rates under CSSA scheme and the rates of allowance under SSA scheme of 2.2%. The rate of adjustment is decided based on our prevailing mechanism. I have a few questions. According to the paper, the weighting system of the SSAIP is adjusted every 5 years to capture the latest expenditure pattern of CSSA recipients. I wonder if we will update the CSSAIP, or rather SSAIP's weighting system more frequently, say we update it every 3 years. Will there be any technical difficulty if we review it more frequently? It is said that the government will incur an extra $1.66 billion of recurrent expenditure, as the old age living allowance account for a larger portion of the expenditure, I wonder if the government will control the growth of the relevant expenditure. Are we going to tighten the threshold? Secretary, for the first question, I will ask Mr. Kwan to answer it. Well, the second question is quite sensitive because you're asking us to raise the income threshold. Overall speaking, this allowance is a non-means tested subsidy. We regularly review the income threshold for the allowance, but we don't have any plan to adjust it now. Mr. Kwok, please. Thank you. The member asked if we can review the weighting system of the SSA-IP more frequently. Well, the household expenditure survey is a large-scale survey. We interview about 2,000 households, and the survey spans across an entire year. This is in line with the CNSD household expenditure survey cycle. So we don't have any plan to adjust the frequency. Mr. Kenneth Lau, thank you. There are many people who rely on CSSA and OH living allowance to meet their daily expenses. So I support the increase of the standard payment rates under CSSA and rates of allowance under SSA scheme. Given our aging population, I believe that there will be more and more recipients of such allowance. With the raise of the rates and allowance, the Treasury had to incur an extra $1.66 billion of recurrent expenditure. So I think that the government should be more cautious in controlling the expenditure. As at the end of October 2025, there are about 810,000 OH living allowance recipient, and as at 2025-26, the figure increased to over 440, well, increased by 7.6%. So I wonder if the Social Welfare Department will ask all recipients to go through a check, and will you tighten the review cycle to every 2 to 3 years? Before Mr. Kwan answer some of the questions, I will address members' concern over the government's financial position. We understand that the allowance will imply a substantial expenditure of the government. However, this allowance is for grassroots elderly people who live in Hong Kong. We're talking about elderly couples with a total asset of less than $600,000. The coverage is large, and there is actually such a demand in the community. We have to be careful, and we have to strike a balance. Ms. Kwan, please. We conduct a check every 6 years, and we adopt a risk-based approach to review all the cases. For high-risk cases, we may look into them more frequently. Thank you. Chairman, I'm afraid of abuse, because if we don't check the recipients every 2 to 3 months, then they may have left Hong Kong, and we don't know if their assets see a substantial increase. Well, as I said, we exchange information with the Immigration Department every month, so we will be notified if any recipient leaves Hong Kong, and we can take follow-up action. Mr. Andrew Fang, thank you. I support the increase in the rates and allowance. It is said that the SSAIP consists of all items covered in the CPIA-BC compiled by CNSD except items covered by special grants under the CSSA schemes. I wonder if the university grant is included. University student of CSSA household can only apply for a non-means tested grant loan from the government. Is this reasonable? Should we not include the university grant in this index? Secretary, as far as I understand, we don't offer just loan to low-income university students, but also grant. We do have sufficient support for university students. Thank you. Regarding university and tertiary tuition, they are included in the SSAIP because it's not considered a special grant. Ms. Grace Chan. The adjustment of the SSAIP reflect the change in the expenditure pattern of CSSA household. However, I think that the weighting system is problematic. I think that we have to look into whether the CSSA payment rate can satisfy the needs of the low-income households in Hong Kong, and I think that we have to change the system. Secretary, we have adjusted the rating system of SSAIP and the calculation of CSSA scheme. Since 1999, we have included the cost of data, the cost of mobile phones into the calculation of the weighting of the SSAIP. And in 2008, we included the transport subsidy for disabled people in the system, and this in the form of a special grant. We do make a large-scale adjustment from time to time. Every 5 years, we look into if there is any major changes to the expenditure of CSSA household. CSSA is the minimum protection offered to low-income household. That's why we will only make necessary changes. Thank you. Next, Mr. Stanley Ng. Thank you, Chairman. We support and respect the mechanism of adjustment. I'd like the government to supply us with some figures. Will the number of recipients change due to the increase in the rates and allowances? Is there a better way to use our resources? We respect the mechanism, but as I said, if the index itself is not reflecting the reality, if it's far too low, then despite our adjustment, it cannot catch up with the times. The standard payment of CSSA is far lower than the minimum wage level. Are you trying to suppress it in such a way that it will not be too far from the minimum wage? Thank you. Secretary.
I thank the member for the questions. To respond to questions about the figures, I'll ask Mr. Lin to elaborate. From what I understand, I know the FTU look at the minimum wage rate as well as the household income of a four-person household. Well, we have the relevant figures for four-person household, but we currently have different financial assistance programs, including the working allowance. So for a four-person household, it is about $4,500 of working allowance. And for those households, they could be exempted from the income test or asset test. I understand why Mr. Stanley is comparing the minimum wage rate with the CSS rate, but I hope that members can understand that CSSA provides a basic safety net for people from the grassroots. In the mainland, for those who are jobless, they can be included in a contributory program. However, in Hong Kong, we cannot provide such protection for those who are unemployed. Let me invite Mr. Lin to elaborate. Well, Mr. Was asking for some figures. In 2025, there were about 193,000 CSSA cases, benefiting about 250,000 people. But we're seeing a downward trend in terms of CSSA cases as well as CSSA recipients. For the old age living allowance scheme, with an aging population, we're seeing an upward trend in relation to the number of recipients. Well, do you see any pattern in relation to the figures? Well, during COVID, there were more CSSA cases. For example, in 2020, there were about 224,000 CSSA cases. But now we're seeing a drop. The latest figure stands at about 193,000. When we first rolled out the minimum wage rate, we saw a significant drop of the number of CSSA recipients. However, over the past decade or so, we didn't see major changes in terms of the number of CSSA recipients. Mr. Augustine Wong, I respect that the rate of change is adjusted in accordance with the existing mechanism. I support the proposal, therefore. According to paragraphs 11 and 12, the accumulative increase should be 1.3%. That means the rental level has increased by 1.3% yearly. And you take into account the CPIA rent index for private housing. If the average moving rate is 1.3%, that means you have taken into consideration the average rental. So my question is, how did you come up with the increase of rent allowance? Did you look at the rental level of small apartments in Hong Kong? I'll ask Mr. Lin to reply. The CPIA rent index for private housing covers the level of rent of low-income tenants. As mentioned by some members, there is a 4.5% increase of rental level in the market, but the CPIA rent index covers those who are currently renting an apartment. Some might be holding a lease that was signed or entered into 1 or 2 years ago. So if you look at the average, we see an increase of 1.3%. So we look at those who have just rented an apartment, those who are already renting an apartment. So the proposed increase should reflect the reality. Reverend Peter Kuhn, I'm not targeting anyone. But just now, some members mentioned that at the panel on welfare services, we did not have any discussions on this proposal. As mentioned, when we circulated the paper to members of the panel, no one raised any comments. Also, when I discussed this with the administration, we wanted to disperse the payment to the people in need as early as possible. It's not that we intentionally did not allow anyone from the panel to have a discussion on the proposal. I guess there is no need for the administration to reply to this. Next, Ms. Christine Fong. Chairman. The administration proposes a 2.2% increase in the standard payment rate with retrospective effect from the 1st of February this year. I support this proposal. Now, pages 2 and 3 of the administration paper states that the proposed increase will translate to a $1.6 billion of extra expenditure for the government. And paragraph 6 of the paper states that there will be an increase in the standard payment rate of CSSA, and this is done in accordance with the established mechanism. My question is, what are the numbers of beneficiaries for each of the items under the CSSA scheme? Understand that a 2.2% increase in CSSA standard payment rates is proposed, and for the disability allowance rates, there will be a 2.2% increase as well. I want to know that as at this year, what are the numbers of beneficiaries under each of these items? Can we have a breakdown, please? Under Secretary, to give you an idea, most people who are receiving CSSAs are elderly. Most members are concerned about CSSA recipients who are jobless, and there are about 10,000 of them each month. Members are concerned about their lives, so last year we rolled out an updated version of an employment program under the CSSA scheme. Some elderly people opt to receive the CSSA, some opt for the old age living allowance. I'll ask Mr. Lin to provide you with the details. I thank members for the questions. To give you some statistics, as at December last year, 250,000 people approximately were getting the CSSA. For the old age allowance, there were about 300,000. As for the old age living allowance, 790,000. And for the disability allowance, the number of recipients was about 180,000. So in total, we're talking about 1.69 million people. I want to remind members that I will put the item to vote after Mr. Mark Chong has spoken. So members who are not here, please come to vote as early as possible. Mr. Hong Kam In, Chairman, I speak in support of the proposed increase in the CSSA standard payment rates as well as the SSA rates of allowances, because the proposed increase will benefit 1.6 million people, and this will incur $1.6 billion of extra expenditure for the government, and this will be disbursed with retrospective effect from the 1st of February this year. For the recipients who have already passed away, and for some reasons the government still disbursed the rates to them, are there ways for the government to recover the funds? I want to know how many people will benefit from the proposed increase of rent allowance, and what kinds of households are we talking about in terms of the beneficiaries? Under Secretary, with regards to the recovery mechanism, I'll ask the SWD to reply. There are cases where the government might have disbursed extra funds to the recipients. And whenever the SWD detects such a situation, we immediately stop the disbursement, and we also talk to the family members of that recipient to see how we should deal with the situation. We're talking about recipients who have passed away, but for those who fail to meet the eligibility requirements because of their increased income, then we will talk to them to see how we can recover the funds in batches. Any follow-up questions? Next, Mr. Mark Chong. Chairman, I'd like to ask about the recovery of funds as well. The government does not conduct the means test for CSSA recipients every year. Sometimes it is only discovered 3 years later that the recipient of the funds was not eligible. So do you have relevant figures showing how many cases failed to meet the eligibility requirement, and what was the success rate for the government to recover the relevant funds? Under Secretary, we adopt a risk-based approach when we look at the cases. For those who experience major changes in their income or asset, we identify those as high-risk groups. So for elderly people who won Mark 6 or who suddenly got a huge sum of money, please report it to the SWD, otherwise we will recover the funds from you. Yes, SWD. We try to recover funds as we follow up on the cases. We don't have the relevant figures at hand as to how many cases in which we managed to recover the funds, but once we found that someone is no longer eligible for CSSA, we will activate the mechanism to recover the funds. Well, how many cases of CSSA recipients who are no longer eligible? Well, there is a small number of cases, and this is not commonplace. Ms. Carmen Khan. Chairman, the government proposes the increase in accordance with the established mechanism, so I support the proposal. I share the same views with other members. I want to make sure that the government is allocating the resources to those in need. Every 6 years, the government reviews the weighting system, and the government in general adopts a risk-based approach. It sounds reasonable to me, but I would like to learn about the details. What will be considered as risks by the government? I guess we can all together decide whether the risk factors are valid. Just now you mentioned about immigration information, so what other risk factors would you consider? Also, for those who are no longer eligible for the CSSA schemes or the Social Security allowance schemes, the government has a mechanism in place to recover the funds. So how many cases were there in which the government failed to recover the funds from those who are no longer eligible? Under Secretary, there is an automated system in place within the government for information exchange. For example, together with the Immigration Department, the Treasury, as well as the CSD and the Labor Department, we exchange information with each other. Also, with the HA, there is a mechanism in place, and every 6 months we exchange information with the Lands Department as well as the registries, companies' registries, and with the WFA scheme office, we also exchange information with them to check whether there are any mismatches. Some elderly people, they may buy stocks or purchase properties, and those people will not be eligible for getting the old age living allowance. We also exchange information with the Lands Department to see if anyone fails to meet the eligibility.
Ms. Kwan, thank you. The Social Welfare Department decide on different review cycles based on the risk level of different CSSA cases. Say, for example, for able-bodied unemployment recipient, their case will be reviewed once every 12 months. However, for elderly recipients, then the review cycle of their case will be once every 3 years. Apart from these reviews, we conduct sample checks on agent recipients of CSSA to review the eligibility of the recipient. We also conduct data checking with other government departments once every few months and some once every year. Any follow-up questions? Chairman, how do we determine if a case is of high, medium, or low risk? Can they supplement in writing? Second, you verify the information to decide whether a case should be escalated from low to medium risk. Can they supplement in writing? If possible, please reply in writing, or you can answer it in panel meeting. What about my other questions? We will supplement later on. Thank you. That's the end of our Q&A session. I now put FCR bracket 2025-2651 to a vote. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the members who voted are in favor of the item. I declare this item approved. This is the last meeting before the Chinese New Year. Please remain in the room. Let me wish you all a great Year of the Horse. The next meeting is 11 a.m. on the 26th of February. We'll be here from the Financial Secretary and the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury on the 2026-27 budget. The meeting adjourned.